Hi, I'm Captain Mike. If you've viewed my videos before, you know I like to expose all the secrets you sometimes run into and you're not told about when you're researching a particular subject, be it a craft or soap making or whatever. Today I'm going to talk about do-it-yourself melt and pour soap base. These things. Now, when I started looking for information on recipes for making do-it-yourself melt and pour soap base, I was baffled by the complexity of how it was made, particularly how many ingredients most people were using to make their soap, and why there were no just really simple recipes, you know, kind of just to get the first time melt and pour soap base maker started without having to go invest in a whole lot of stuff. If you're a soap maker, you probably have everything that you need, if you've been making it long, to make some of these complicated recipes. But I decided to see how uncomplicated I could make a usable melt and pour base, if I tried. So I used the KISS method, and that is short for Keep It Simple Stupid. And here's what we have right now. These are the bases that I have made, and we'll get into testing them in a minute, but I'll go over them very briefly. This one right here, now these are 2-oil soap bases. I used only 2 basic oils. Now when I say basic oils, I'm not talking about cocoa butter, cocoa butter, shea butter, goat's milk, all that junk. Excuse me, it's really not junk because I use it. All that stuff, those are enhancers, okay? You don't have to have them to make soap. So I kept this simple as I could. This one has nothing but vegetable shortening and palm kernel oil in it. This one has coconut oil and palm kernel oil in it. This one has olive oil and coconut oil in it. This one has vegetable shortening and coconut oil. I shifted up just a little bit from this one and I went to 3 oils just to see what it would do. I used vegetable shortening, coconut oil, and palm kernel oil in this one. This one right here is made for my secret recipe, cold process soap recipe that I use to do cold and hot process soap. So I just took some of my master batch that I make up so that I can make just big, huge quantities of it at one time, measured out about 18 ounces, and made this one. There are 6 different ingredients in this bar, including some of those things I mentioned that are not in these bars, like cocoa butter, shea butter, goat's milk, all that stuff, okay? This one, I don't know what this one was. I do know I thought it was a master batch when I made it. It traced real fast, and as you can see, it's kind of lumpy and bumpy, but I don't know. It's not light heavy, but it's different. So not a problem. I tested every single one of these. None of them are light heavy. And you ask me, well, how do you test them to see they're light heavy? Pick them up, stick your tongue to them. It's not nasty. Brush your teeth. But I tested every one of these, and none of them are light heavy. Are they soap? I'm 99% sure they're all soap. Are they melt and pour soap? I don't know. That's what these little glasses are for. We're going to do a couple of different tests. We're going to test them for, will they melt, and will they make lather? Which one makes what kind of lather? Now, the only thing all of these, not these 2, but all of these 5 here have in common is they have a lye solution, was calculated for each type of oils that are in them. It didn't vary much. It mostly was 9 ounces for what I was using here, but it did vary a few tenths of an ounce. But I calculated lye, and I keep my lye at 33% water discount. If you don't know what that is, just look it up. You can go to 0%, 33%, whatever, and all that really does is makes it trace at a different rate, and it makes less water, so there's less downtime. Another video, but right now that's the lye solution. They all have the same. I used vegetable glycerin in all of these in roughly the same amount. I put about 14 ounces of glycerin. You can go up to about 16, they say. There's a calculator for this, and I'll try to put it in the bottom down there in the comments for where you can get a ingredient calculator for melt and pour soap. But I use vegetable glycerin, I use propylene glycol, and I use sorbitol, which is nothing but sugar. And so that's what these are. They all blended well, all traced well. You can see the only difference in them is a little color. The olive oil is a lot darker. These each are just a little few shades off. And none of them are really, really transparent. This one here is more translucent with the PKO and the coconut oil than any of the rest. And actually, at this particular point in time, none of them are sweating. Don't ask me why. I made some base. The first base I ever made is in a video that you'll see before you get to this one. And it sweated. I don't know what the difference is. Georgia, our humidity swings from 10%, and it's really cold like this morning, to 75% before a storm blows in, and it causes the weather to do strange things. But this, just for a reference, this is store-bought, transparent melt and pour soap, okay? That's what it looks like. So the point here was not to make a transparent soap. I just decided to use the propylene glycol, which is a necessary ingredient to make transparent soap, that and the alcohol, because I had a lot of it. When I did my series of 4 videos on different kinds of soap, history of soap, and what all you could do with them, I had purchased a lot of supplies. So I had gallons of this and that and the other, and I was trying to use it up, and I said, this is going to be a good video if I can make it work. So, with that said, before I do the tests on these, I have one other test that I'm going to do. You knew that was coming. We are going to see if we can't do a batch of soap using one oil ingredient, and I'm going to use that right there. I'm going to use vegetable shortening, and that's all, nothing else. I'm going to use sugar instead of sorbitol, because they say that's what it is. And I'm going to use, of course, because it won't be melt and pour soap without it, I'm going to use some glycerin, okay? And this is the glycerin that I use. And we're going to, there's my dog, she's going to bark. So let me clear this table and get prepared, drag my crock pot out here, and mix these ingredients and see if I can make a melt and pour soap with one oil ingredient. It's going to be interesting. You guys hang in there till I get it all set up. Okay, I've got all my materials laid out. And this is going to be the recipe that we're going to use. Now, you've noticed there is no glycol in this recipe because all I'm wanting to do is see if I can make a super, most basic melt and pour soap. I don't care whether it's opaque, translucent, or transparent. It's not important to me at this time. All it's got to do is become melt and pour soap and suds a little bit so that it will, work as a soap. So this is what we're using right here. It's real simple. Now, I've got all of my supplies out here. I've got my crock pot, and the first thing we will do is turn it on high. I do all this on high. And just for those of you who are curious, no matter what I cook in this crock pot, soap-wise, all of those that I showed you earlier, they get up to about 220 degrees. If you sit them there all day long, I'm sure if you were making a stew, it would get hotter. But as this soap takes about 2 hours to make a batch, more or less, but roughly 2 hours. And the soap pot gets up to about 220 degrees. So, and how do I know that? It's because I have a little digital thermometer that I use. So anyway, that's this. It's on hot. Duh. Yeah, well, it is hot. It's on high. And I have a spoon. I have my little blender. More about them blenders later. And all I do first is blend up my oils. Yeah, that's close enough. And that's it. That's all you're going to put in there to start with. You dump your oils in there. In this case, it's 18 ounces of vegetable shortening. It comes from whatever your favorite grocery store is. And you put the top on it, and you let it completely melt. All right, we have our oil melted, ready to go to the next step. Just to recap, the only oil we have in there is vegetable shortening, and we are next going to put some sodium hydroxide pre-mixed, 33% water discount, and we're going to put it in here, and we're going to mix it just like we would make a hot or cold processed soap. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Everybody says use a stick blender sparsely because it creates air bubbles. I ain't scared of no air bubbles. They're gonna all rise to the top. You're gonna be cooking this stuff for the next hour and a half. Any air bubbles in here, they're gonna come out, and I'm gonna show you how to get rid of the ones on the top. So take your stick blender. Hopefully yours is not as ugly as mine. Take your sodium hydroxide, and this is a good time to say, if you don't have eyewear on, for gracious sakes, go get you some eyewear. Gloves if you have sensitive hands, because when this stuff splashes on it, it will burn you a little. It's going to ruin your day if it gets in your eyes. So with that safety message out of the way, let's pour the sodium hydroxide in here and see how fast it traces. It's going to be pretty fast. Now that traced almost instantly. Won't hurt a thing. Continue to stir. You want to make sure all the sodium hydroxide is mixed with your oil. Don't worry about them nasty little bubbles. They're going to be just all right the way they are. So now you are ready to let this stuff cook for a while. Because the next step in making the melt and pour soap, and pretty much hot processed soap. Now see, if this was cold processed soap, I'd add whatever other ingredients I wanted to add to it and my fragrance, and stir it up some more, pour it in the mold, and through. Hot processed soap, I'd let it cook like we're fixing to until it goes to a gel state. So we're gonna have to cover it up again, keep an eye on it, and whenever it starts to kind of rise, you'll take your spoon and you'll beat it back into shape. It'll go on down, air bubbles will come out and it'll go on down, poof on down. Let it cook some more. As long as it's doing that, you'll restir it until it goes to gel state. Show you what I mean in a minute. Now here's what I was talking about it wanting to kind of rise up. And this is common with hot processed soap. And I say they, people who do a lot of hot processed soap. I do not do a lot of hot processed soap. But, you know, I'm told that when it gets this way, when it gets sort of out of hand, you just kind of stir it down until it behaves. That's the statement they use. Now this is because there's not a lot of real different kinds of oils in here. It is a little drier than normal, but what you do is just stir it like this until it's kind of back down dense again without all those fluffy little boiling bubbles or whatever you want to call it. And you let it sit again. Now, what you're looking for here, based on time, relatively speaking, is the soap turning kind of transparent? And it is. So it's beginning to gel. I don't know at this point if you could over gel it, overcook it. It's occurred to me during all these 6 or 8 different batches that I've made of melt and pour soap and a couple of hot process, if you can cook it too long. I don't really know. If some of you all know, let me know about that. But I'll cook this a little longer until it has quit rising and it's basically a gelatinous mass in the bottom. Then I'll add the other ingredients and we will see if it will turn into melt and pour soap. I think we have a pretty good gel here. It's not rising anymore really. It's just pretty much sitting here and it looks like it might be kind of drying out around the edges where the heat is. So this is usually where I decide to turn it from hot process soap into melt and pour soap. And so what's what we're going to do here? We're going to take the sorbitol, actually I lied, we're going to take the substitute for the sorbitol, some granulated sugar, and we're going to put it in there. And we're going to kind of fold it a little bit just to get the sugar off the top and down kind of inside. I'm sure the heat will cause this sugar to melt. It usually does. I find no granulated or sugar or sorbitol whenever I do this. And then we're going to add the glycerin, and hopefully this will liquefy it a little bit. This glycerin is what makes the hot process soap into melt and pour soap. It allows the soap itself to remelt. Probably some chemistry there. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'll take the expert's word for it that if you don't have glycerin and add it to it, you're not going to get melt and pour soap. So there we go. It's added. All my ingredients are in this. 1 oil, sodium hydroxide, some sugar, and some glycerin. And I begin to stir it up. And as usual, the glycerin will cool it down some from where it originally was, and the oils or the soap that they, as it's now soap, it's not oils anymore because some saponification has taken place, and it kind of breaks it up into some kind of cottage cheese looking pieces. And you say to yourself, self, I must have really screwed up here because it don't look like it's ever going to be anything. But trust me, whether this is going to be an acceptable melt and pour soap or not, I don't know, but it will remelt. All this mess will melt. As you mix it back and forth, it will begin to melt. And so I get it kind of broke up into manageable little chunks and flatten it kind of out. Give it time to cook some more because that's what it's going to do. So most of the instructions that I have read online say to do all these cooking steps in 15-minute increments. You time it for 15 minutes, blah, blah, you do this, and after a total of so much time, you know, it's supposed to be where it's supposed to be. I find that, yeah, that's a good starting point, but as you make some of this, you're going to learn to look at the soap and tell when it needs to go from one step to another and the final step of pouring it out. And we'll get to that in just a minute. We're going to put the top back on it. We're going to let it cook some more. All right, we've got this stuff cooked down to some smaller pieces. I'm sure if you sit here and let it cook long enough and you stirred it enough that it would eventually make it into a solid liquid by itself. But here's what I do. And again, this is something that a lot of people tell you not to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I have had no problems with it. And that is using your stick blender to break up this. It will work. And don't worry about the bubbles. Once you let it sit for just a little bit after you have blended it together, the bubbles will start to rise and form a skim on the top. And you could do a couple of things. And we'll get to those after we've blended it up and I show you what I'm talking about. So let's blend it a little. Okay, there's a lot of bubbles in this, but you can tell already that the consistency of the soap has changed and it is more like a melt and pour soap. So what I'm going to do now is put the top back on it and let it come back up to heat. Because every time we take the top off of it and do something to it, it begins to cool a little bit. But you can see there's no lumps now. It's just kind of a creamy consistency. And it dries or cools very, very rapidly. So you just kind of put the top back on it and let's let it see if this mess will turn into a liquid that you can pour. Like I said, I've never done a one oil batch before. We're just going to see if it's possible. Okay, we're down to the final step here, and at this particular point I turn off the heat, and if there are any bubbles at all present, there's really not that many bubbles in this particular batch because it's only one oil and I didn't have glycerin. It's actually a little thicker than normal, but if you don't have any alcohol, pick you some up. I doubt very seriously if you're going to buy it for 69 cents a jug anymore, or a bottle, since the pandemic. But get you some cheap alcohol, put you one of these little tops on it like this, and keep it in your shop. It's great for cleaning glass. But what you do is if you have bubbles, you just spritz it like that, put the top back on it for a while, and then come back and stir it up, okay? And that kind of will get rid of the bubbles. So what we're going to do now is stir this back down just to wherever it is, happens to be, excuse me, and then we're going to pour it in this mold right here, all right? Now, put you some gloves on. I hope these gloves are going to be thick enough because this crock pot's hot. Do not grab it unless you are prepared to grab it. So stir it back down. There'll be a little skim on the top where it's cooling. So you're going to have to be quick about this, okay? Go ahead and stir it down real good so that it's all incorporated. Don't worry about that little bit on there. Pick it up and pour it in your mold quick as you can. Now, with the thinner stuff, it's not a problem. Now, these gloves are not only slippery. I don't like these. I just all I had. But they also transfer heat. With this particular one, I'm going to beat it down just a little bit because it's kind of like applesauce. All the others, I did not have to do it. All the bubbles rose to the top, whatever it was, and as you saw, the bottoms of them, they were just as slick as a baby's butt. So we'll come back to this one after it cools, unmold it, and see if we have melt and pour soap with one basic oil ingredient. Okay? So that's where we are. Let's let this thing cool, and then we'll wrap this video up. Well, I've completed all of my experiments, at least all that I'm going to do. Those of you who know something about math know that the variations on all of this here are infinite. You could do any number of things and jockey around the ingredients and come up with different results. I tried to keep it as scientific as I possibly could. And I'm down to everything except how it lathers, okay? I haven't done that yet, and I'll get through this real quick and we'll try to lather some of these and see. Here's what I have so far. This coconut oil and palm kernel oil, as you would expect if you're a soaper, is the hardest of the bunch, also the most brittle. As you can see, it actually just will break up into little pieces if you're not careful, and it's very hard. It was hard to cut. The rest of them are more or less the same. Of olive oil was a little of the softer bunch, but anything with coconut oil or PKO in it has a tendency to be makes a harder bar. We all know that from cold process soaping. So that's what you've got here. Now, all of these were made using some glycol, all of them but this one, and it was just a single oil batch. And I've got this wrong here. This goes here, and this goes here. This is the single oil batch, and it behaved a little differently. So you can see the colors, you can see the differences. They're all supposed to have been transparent. Some of them are translucent. Some of them are a little different colored. Again, I tried to make it as even as I could. You can mess with all the ingredients, the amount of glycol, the amount of whatever, and I'm sure you can come up with different results. But I wanted to show you that you could make a simple melt and pour base using nothing but at least no less than 2 base oils, what I consider base oils. And of course you can add your butters and all that, fine, but that's not what this is about. This is, does these make a melt and pour base? And the first and most important on a melt and pour base is, does it melt? So here we go. This is the vegetable shortening and palm kernel oil, and as you can see, it does melt. Took about 30 seconds. Here is the coconut oil and palm kernel oil, and it's the lightest of the bunch, and it melted the same about 30 seconds. Olive oil and coconut oil, it too melts. The vegetable shortening and the coconut oil, it melted. Vegetable oil and coconut oil, same thing, it melted. And my secret recipe, which is the oils and butters and all that stuff that I use in a regular cold process batch of soap, it melts too. All I did is add glycol and glycerin. That's all I did, and some sorbitol, and boom, it turned cold process, hot process soap, a regular recipe, into a melt and pour base. Now, this one right here was a single oil soap. In single oil soap, I used vegetable shortening. And here's what I got. It didn't melt very well. That's about a minute in different, in 10-second blasts. All it wanted to do was bubble up. That's all it wanted to do. Now, with that said, if you used a different base, let's say if you just tried nothing but olive oil, which would be a Castile soap, or nothing but PKO, coconut oil, just a one base oil, I'm betting that you would get a different outcome. This one's sweating a little bit, and it's just behaving like a regular bar of cold process or hot process soap. So this one, of course, I did not try to melt because I don't really know what it is, and so it'd just be for grins and giggles if I did it. It was some oil I had sitting around, and I said, I don't know what it is. Now's a good time to experiment with it because I'm not going to use it for anything anyway because I don't know what it is. So there you go. So what I'm going to do now is lather each and every one of these. So I'm going to lather them. You hang in there and I will come back and show you whether they lather or not. We'll start first with the vegetable shortening and palm kernel oil. Okay, you see the lather. It melts and it lathers. It's soap, it's melt and pour soap. So that worked out pretty good. This one is coconut and PKO. Lathers very well as you expect it to. So it's soap and it's melt and pour. This one is olive oil and coconut oil. It does lather. They're nice small bubbles. It does lather and it's soap. So and it does melt very nicely. So that's a success. Vegetable shortening and coconut oil. Again, very nice fine bubbles. Good lather though, but it does lather. It's soap and it melts well. Now this one was the one that was a little bit different. This is a three base oils. Vegetable shortening, coconut oil, and palm kernel oil. And it has a nice, it lathers extremely well as you would expect if you included palm kernel oil and coconut oil in anything you have. But it worked out really good and it melted really well. So that's a 3 oil soap. The other 4 here are 2 oil soaps. But they're all basic oils. They all ought to be oils that you have on hand in your shop. Okay, this one is the base made from my secret recipe, which has a lot of different things in it. It's my what I use normally for cold process and I would use for hot process. It makes nice fine bubbles. The more you rub it, the better it's going to be. It is a really good soap. You can see it's very rich and it worked out great and it melts well. Now the last one makes bubbles. It makes some lather. It is soap, but it doesn't melt. And but I just thought I'd lather it to show you. It is the vegetable shortening only. I wish I had time to do some tests using coconut oil only, PKO only, and olive oil, but I've already drugged this thing on and I've used up a lot of supplies. So that's what we've got with this. Now, in closing, the whole experiment was to see how simple I could keep making a do-it-yourself melt and pour base without all the mumble jumble, secret recipes, addition of all this other stuff. I use no castor oil, no shea butter, none of that stuff. Have no problem with it. I use it, but I wanted to keep this really, really simple. I will put the recipe that I use, the basic recipe, in the comments below if you're interested. How much the oils weighed, how much sodium hydroxide I used, and how much glycol, glycerin, and sorbitol, and then you can go from there. Now, a word of caution is, any recipe that you take, make sure you run the oils through a lye calculator. Don't rely on what I say. Because I may be super fatted, I may be zero, I'm whatever. Don't matter. I don't care what anybody tells you. Run it through a lye calculator for the oils you use. Didn't use that. It's not hard to do, especially if you have percents. You can figure the bulk weight of your oil, say 18 ounces, but you know that 18 ounces, 50% is olive oil and 50% is coconut oil. All you've got to do is the math. And you will know that out of 16 ounces, that's 8 ounces of coconut oil and 8 ounces of olive oil, whatever. And then you can go to your calculator and fix it. If you have any questions, if I have made this too complicated for you, then let me know. I appreciate it. I find this a success. I find that you can make melt and pour base with things that you find basically in your home. And if you're a soaper, you definitely have them. So there you go. If you have any questions and you want answers and I can't answer it, put them in the comments below. Please be adult. I will too. This is a learning experience. I make mistakes, you will make mistakes too. So we'll learn from each other and we'll go from there. Now all I've got to do is figure out what I'm going to do with all this soap base. I'm Captain Mike. I'm out of here.